maybe I can ask, if you're brave enough, does anyone have any particular reason for being here, specifically looking for something? Anything very poignant to you that you're looking for? Yeah.
I'm curious to know if there is a way to separate the teacher from the teachings. If you need a teacher to receive the teachings and you need teachings to see a teacher, can you separate them?
We could get derailed if I start being a therapist right now. Okay.
I mean, I ask in relation to spiritual bypassing because it's very easy to just give everything over.
Yes.
And then when that doesn't work,
Yeah.
it can be quite devastating.
Yes. Okay. Good. I have. Yeah. Go ahead.
Excuse me. From the way it was worded in the flyer, I was really interested by it. Was like people missing blind spots, like practitioners. Excuse me. Sincere practitioners doing a sadhana, doing some kind of meditative or yoga practice, and then perhaps being unable to look at something which is realistic, but because it's not interesting or uncomfortable, to hide it.
Yeah.
And I thought that was really interesting. So I look forward to hearing about that anyway.
Okay. Okay. So let me dive in. I mentioned that this topic was invented. It's not the right word, but coined by John Welwood. So if those of you taking notes want the source for some of the quotes I'll be sharing with you, that's the source. John Welwood's in California. His main thing is intimacy and relationships and spiritual community. He's part of the whole transpersonal movement. We define spiritual bypassing this way. There's a widespread tendency to use spiritual ideas and practices to sidestep or avoid facing unresolved emotional issues, psychological wounds, and unfinished developmental tasks. So to sidestep emotional issues, we understand, and maybe psychological wounds we can certainly understand, but the developmental tasks, that's a little bit of a jargon term in psychotherapy for things that we may have, if the environment in our childhood was conducive, we may have worked things out naturally or in a predictable manner. And so many of us come from childhoods where there wasn't enough psychological resources to actually work some of these things out, so then they get buried and then they resurface in our adult relationships and they resurface in the Dharma community. So that's the unfinished developmental task. The implication of this work is, as Welwood states, we can use spiritual transcendence to rise above the raw and messy side of our humanness before we have fully faced and made peace with it. And then we tend to use absolute truth to disparage or dismiss relative human needs, feelings, psychological problems, relational difficulties, and developmental deficiencies. He has this, in his writings, he has a very interesting notion of the divided self. The divided self is when we partition. And this is not just with John Welwood. You'll find this in literature, Jung's shadow material. These are parts of our personality that we don't want to face or recognize or acknowledge or own. But they get heightened in spiritual community when you start talking about all the lovely bits, all the idealized bits, and because finally you get into someone's defining what you should become, and putting language and modeling for where you're going. So finally you have a template, you have a direction, and you have a role model, and you have all these qualities, and they're pronounced. And then you start, doing your work. But what that means, if you're not careful, is that you will they don't seem to match your internal experience of who you think you are, what you feel, what you've experienced, where you've been. It doesn't really mesh with what your current experience is. So then there's a divided self, which these unwanted, because it's relative, right? These things relative to the ideals become unwanted, become messy, become disgusting, become frightening, become unwanted. And so this divided self is a kind of pushing it away. You can say a denial. The more denial, the more problems. It's kind of like P. Diddy, more denial, more problems. And I personally think this is when, these debacles in spiritual communities happen. It's because a spiritual teacher or a spiritual student has failed to own some of their realistic woundings. And then it comes out, and you get these well, we'll talk about the phenomenon. I'm sure that everybody in here has some sort of experience, either looking at other spiritual communities or actually having this experience. But what happens? What happens when a spiritual teacher falls? You start to question the spiritual teacher, but then no one really questions, well, why did we elevate the spiritual teacher? That becomes an interesting question. What need do we have to idealize people? So that becomes interesting. So the way that I went about doing this research for this is there is no succinct defined categorization of spiritual bypassing. You can't find a DSM literature that diagnoses all the types or variations. What ends up happening is that they all have a certain kind of origin, but then their presentations become so various because everybody is so different. So I started doing this categorization on my own, noticing in my own life, how I was spiritual bypassing, and I could fit it into certain categories. And then because my work as a therapist is mostly with yogis, I had a lot of data, this is what I've noticed in some people. And suddenly I had a list that was growing, these are the categories of spiritual bypassing. But then it became very apparent to me, for every person and their issue, there is a way to bypass. So all I can really do is, the last month of reflecting on this, I can share some examples of it, but really the work is for you to figure out, how do I do this, if I do it at all? And how are my associates or colleagues or fellow yogis might be doing this? And then if you can identify it in yourself better, it'll bring compassion to how you actually start to relate to other people. Because you'll know, oh yeah, I know that one. Oh yeah, I know that one. And suddenly it has some give to it instead of the immediate knee-jerk reaction of judging, right? So before I actually go into some of the categories that I have observed, I wanted to just touch lightly on trauma. Trauma and how it's stored is really, really important. Because this is if you want to look at the Four Noble Truths, this is the first and second Noble Truth. First and second Noble Truth being suffering and its causes. How do we even have trauma to bury, to bypass, you have to say? Before we get to the bypass, we have to understand a little bit how we get here. So there are two types of trauma. One is the trauma of not getting enough, and the other is the getting something we didn't need, we shouldn't have gotten. Now that first type of trauma everybody experiences. Why is that? Because children are incredibly vulnerable and dependent. Mammals in general spend a lot of time with their caregivers, and brain development takes a lot of time, and so you are at the mercy as an infant for a very long period of time. You're vulnerable and susceptible. You're like a sponge. And it's almost nearly impossible for a caregiver to be consistently reliable, dependable, and available emotionally at any time. So what you get is breaches, what are called empathic failures. Empathic failures means when you get missed? Are you with me or no? Yeah. Okay. You freak me out when everybody's so quiet. Yeah, my favorite example is like a 3-year-old kid who has got their painting that they did in school. Daddy, Daddy, look at my painting. Daddy's reading the newspaper, okay? That's nice. Goes back to the newspaper. I'll do it again. Daddy, Daddy, look at my painting. Oh, that's nice, son. He goes back to it. So it's Saturday. Daddy is just beat from a long week. Okay? He just wants to read the fucking New York Times for a second. Okay? What does the child experience?
Rejection.
The child experiences rejection. Okay? Now, this is like, everybody gets that. Everybody gets that because we're empathic creatures and we understand it. The problem is that it's not just rejection. It's not just the emotional hit in the moment, because we are creatures who make stories. We are story makers. So the emotional hit then gets lodged into a narrative, what's called the traumatic narrative, or the self-identified narrative. So what does that become? It's not just the rejection, it becomes what? What's the example?
I'm not good enough.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. I'm not lovable, I'm not good enough, I'm not worthy. Or the reverse, Daddy is this, Daddy is that, the world is this, the world is that. Now what happens is that happens like 16 times every single day. And the narrative just gets more coherent and more robust and more buried in a way. It just starts like in my office I have a filing cabinet, right? The brain is a little bit like the filing cabinet. It is just a storage system of memory after memory after memory after incident after event after event after event after event. And then all of that event and all that stuff gets synthesized into a narrative. It's called the traumatic narrative. And then it gets buried unconscious. And then you arrive in your adult life trying to have a relationship and make it through to the job or whatever, and we're pretty much flailing through life. I mean, we put on the smile and the Chanel glasses and we look smashing and we head out the door, but like inside we're just shattered people, like trying to put it together enough. Because life is very, very challenging and unpredictable, and people have been unstable, and we've been hurt over and over and over again. And so this little narrative, what I sometimes call stolen from the Matrix, is called a residual self-image. Residual self-image is the story, the secret story of your life. The secret story that maybe only your therapist or lover knows about you and what happened to you and how you made sense of it. Like if I sat you down, you're all strangers to me, and we had an hour together, the way that you would present to me your life in a candid, confidential discussion would be your story. It's how you frame file after file, event after event, memory after memory. You create it in a certain way. This happened to me, and it really was hard, and you just go through the whole thing like that. That's the residual self-image. It only comes out every so often when we get slammed with reality of life. When somebody leaves us, or somebody divorces us, or something didn't work out, or we didn't get the interview, or we didn't get the job, or whatever. Or even like benign, silly things like, I always give the example, like there's 50 people in the crowd, and I'm giving a talk, and halfway through the lecture, one person gets up to leave. And the traumatic narrative is right there. I'm not good enough. I'm a lousy... I don't know what I'm talking about. They found out I don't know what I'm talking about. Because I come in here and I'm Dr. Neale, and I sit down and I'm the meditation teacher, and like, here are my students, and I'm going to give a presentation. That's all also another story. That's the story I tell myself to make myself feel good about myself. And then one person gets up, and instantly what that does is it taps into the secret story that's like underneath the radar. And that brings up all kinds of cascade of anxiety, and then, like I could walk out of here feeling really worthless or whatever. Or when I hit my pillow at night, I don't think about the 49 people that stayed to listen to the talk. I think about the one person. What did they think? And I'm giving this little bit of this background at IDP right now. There's some evolutionary data to suggest that the brain holds on to the negative for survival purposes. Like, we have to register these things so that we don't repeat them. But like, we're a civilized culture now. We're civilized human beings. We don't need some of the old architecture and the old modeling and the old programming to survive anymore. But it's still occurring. So trauma is also, interestingly enough, in the attachment literature, trauma is also inheriting your parents' story, which I find just unbelievably fascinating. Like, it's not just the empathic failures and how they register. And of course, real trauma, like legitimate trauma, abuse, physical, sexual, and whatever, that's also a whole other category. We won't have time to go into that. But then there's also the inheritance of your parents' narrative and their story. How your parents framed their trauma is inherited. Well, one of my teachers, my mentor, is a psychiatrist and Buddhist teacher. His name is Joe Luizzo. He's written a fascinating article on transgenerational inheritance. And this is what he's basically making a plug for karma, suggesting that karma is the inherited story we get from a past generation, how we store it, and how it colors our thoughts, feelings, actions in this life, and how we leave a legacy to other people that we surround ourselves with. And then it just gets transmitted down, just like genes get transmitted. Like, you've got eye color and hair color and body type, right? But you also inherit predisposition, storyline, framing, mental ways of framing reality. Yes or no?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Why is it important for us to get this kind of background? Because this is all the nasty bits we don't want to talk about in our yoga practice when we're doing downward dog or getting into, dancer's pose or whatever. This is not the stuff that we want to talk about when we have a great teacher come in and he's giving or she's giving, the entire Lam-Rim commentary or whatever it is. But this is what's underneath the radar, this buried trauma and this narrative for everyone, for you. This is the stuff, like, if you don't take seriously, this is the nutshell of what I found. If you don't take this stuff seriously, it doesn't go away. Just because your standing bow becomes beautiful doesn't mean your trauma isn't there. Just because you have some fancy insight into what emptiness means conceptually, and you've elevated yourself to the third level of whatever course you're in, doesn't mean you don't still carry in your neural network and your brain memory traumatic history and interpretation of who you think you are. That's what the bypass is. You can't get away with it because this is who you are. Like, in your nervous system. It's not who you are absolutely. It's not who you are intrinsically. But it's definitely who you are conventionally. And, like, what does that mean, conventionally? Suddenly you introduce a concept like absolute and conventional, and everything becomes fuzzy, ooey gooey. Conventionally means, like, in day-to-day, in relationships, in your interactions, and in your, secret script with yourself, this is who you think you are. So you better take it seriously. The bypass is like our attempt to pretend that that's not there. And then the infinite varieties of the bypass become very interesting too. So are we all on the same page so far? Mm-hmm. Two of the things that I found that we need to even progress is space for everything, making space for it all, and then a recognition of our internal residue or our internal traumatic memory. Like, you need both of those things. Everything is a tool that you get in the Dharma and yoga community. It's a tool, can be used in a variety of different ways, right? A knife can be used to make a lovely dinner, can be used to hurt somebody. A computer is the same way. You can download an iPod, can be used to blast hideous, music into your ears, or you can listen to a teaching with it. No problem. Just how you use it. Meditation and psychotherapy the same way. Meditation can be used to bypass your neural experience and your storyline, or it can be used to get more into it, to be more connected with it. Same with psychotherapy. Although it's a little bit harder when you start working with another person's mind. There's innately in that process a little bit of what's called checks and balance. Because sometimes it becomes, you can hide out in therapy for 6 months, let's say. Hide out, everybody understands?
Yeah.
Yeah. Brave face, how good I am. If you're like me, you can hide out for 3 years. Expert hiding. PhD-worthy hiding. But if you're moderately good, then 6 months you stop hiding, and then something happens and you get real. And then what's the real? The real is the interdependence, and the real is the arising. Like the teaching on the dependent co-arising is said to be the flip side of the coin of emptiness. Emptiness means that nothing is inherently real from its own side. Your personality isn't fixed. But it's never taught independent of the teaching on interdependence or arising. So that arising is your residual self-image. Has to be taken together with the fact that it's not innately real or innately fixed. But you can't ever have one teaching without the other. It's impossible. Every moment that you understand that you're innately free is a moment where you equally have to accept who you are in this moment with all your frailties, limits, doubts, and fears. But now you already get it. Like, how much of the teaching experience in the Dharma and yoga communities are we doing that? It's like 99% the other thing. And the minute something ugly comes up that's the conventional arising of somebody's personality or experience, it's like, ooh. Everybody goes like heading for the door, metaphorically. Okay, you ready for the list? I'll read the headings, and then I'll give you a little data. These are my headings, and there's I'll get into how this is mostly, not in a narcissistic way, but on an honest way. The only way I could really do this is look at my own life, okay? So, I just have to throw that out there. I'm not afraid to do it. I mean, that's I would be not modeling a good teaching of this if I wasn't able to connect with all my limits. So please be kind. So, conflict avoidance in the guise of being easygoing. The conflict avoidance in the guise of being easygoing has all the teachings on what we do with this dirty word called anger. So we might not even get to number 2. Number 2, codependence in the guise of being compassionate. Number 3, who's your daddy? Working things out with the guru. Number 4, detachment as suppression. Number 5, the spiritual superego. Number 6, using absolute truth to deny the relative. Number 7, overcompensatory identity. And the last one I came up with was spiritual goodies that feed our narcissism. Okay, so let's do a little bit. And maybe as we go along, we can have a little discussion. Was there any one that we should start with? Anybody?
The last one.
Number 3 was working things out.
With the guru, yeah. Who's your daddy?
Remember, with the detachment of suppression.
Okay. All right, in Indian philosophy, you're familiar with the lists. The first one on the list is always the most important. So I chose the first one because it's really what I've been doing in therapy. It's trying to work this thing out. So I'm just going to give you a taste of what conflict avoidance in the guise of compassion or being easygoing is. Conflict avoidance means you can't set a limit with somebody, and you can't really tell them how upset or angry you are. Why is that? Because in my picture, in my history, in my traumatic narrative, there's an overbearing, angry, narcissistic father. Narcissistic father, and everybody understands narcissism as defined by someone who lacks empathy. That means they don't really feel your internal experience. They're very self-involved. But like, you can imagine there's only enough spotlight on the stage for one. And they will recruit or manipulate or use people to bolster them up. So basically, you become like a battery for them. Your energy is just about propping them up. And it's usually a very grandiose presentation. These are the kind of people that walk into the room and everybody captures their attention right away. They're usually people that are excellent and admirable, which makes it very, very difficult as a little boy because, first of all, the world, there's only enough love to go around for one person in the relationship. That's himself. So the only way that I learned to have a relationship with my father was to please him and to constantly think about him and to constantly anticipate what his needs were and to constantly bury my own needs because they weren't really ever going to get met. And so that instead of face the disappointment of not getting what I needed, I would just bury that need and focus on pleasing, hoping that I would get a little cookie out of it. Follow me?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. That's the getting what you want side of the relationship. The other side is you don't want to cross a narcissist. Because what happens is then it's on. And that means like shame. This is retaliatory. It's called in the literature a narcissistic injury. If you narcissistically injure, if you call a narcissist out, you're going to get the dagger. And so, as a young, helpless, person, I couldn't actually access any of the negative feelings I had about not being heard or loved or acknowledged or anything like that because that would upset the dynamic. And with that upset dynamic, not only would I not get the things that I wanted, I'd get some nasty bits too. So I basically learned to people please. And I'm a fucking good people pleaser, it turns out. I can smile and yes with the best of them. But what happens with somebody who gets into the spiritual community as a people pleaser and you find the teachings on compassion, and you find the teachings on serving others, and you find the teachings on put your ego down, think about others.
It's 5 o'clock.
You get all this. You get all these amazing teachings that totally exacerbate your neuroses. Like those couldn't be more worse teachings for me. But guess what? They're the ones that are they jive like a glove with my personality. So I'm good at that. But this is the problem, isn't it? It's like we gravitate to the teachings that are easy for us because they've been so conditioned and programmed by childhood because we needed to survive that way. We just, is it no secret that people in the spiritual community are loving, tender, compassionate people? We gravitated here for a reason. These teachings make so much sense to us. But then it just might be, if your experience is similar to mine, that you got there because of some injury. And that this teaching on being, put down your ego, think about somebody else, drop the anger, stuff the anger, don't feed the anger, these teachings if they're not taken very delicately, can only habituate you to your own storyline, to your own sense of resentment. Then that can't come up. There's no space for that. Are you following me?
Yes.
Okay. So I have some people like that. So I'm not alone.
Do you have the same father?
Okay. So the anger, we have to talk a little bit about the anger. Like, anger is probably the dirtiest word in a spiritual community. You can't be angry. It just is totally unacceptable. But the idea is that we either act out anger or we suppress it. And if you're anything like me, then you become really good at suppressing it, but then it comes out in other places, mostly self-directed. So if you looked at my wrists, you'd see scars and burns, because when I was a kid, I was slashing myself because there was no place for that anger to come out. And I had this narcissistic father who would dehumanize me and castrate me if I said anything, and I had nowhere else for these feelings to go, so they just like churned and churned and churned, and they have to come out somehow. So then it's just like slash and burn here, right? So then you get into the spiritual community, and they're still telling us not to have this thing, right? So where's it going is the question. Where is it going? Because it's not disappearing. So then what to do about it if we want to take it seriously? What to do about it is already in the teachings. What to really do. The practice of mindfulness is itself confirming the middle way option of how to deal with it. That you are allowed to have it. You are allowed to experience it. You are allowed to see it. You are allowed to have it come up. It's just we have been so habituated to fear it or suppress it. So we think that if we allow ourselves to get angry, what do we think? If I really let myself get angry, what do we think?
Lose control and do something.
Yeah, I'm going to do something crazy. So then we leave ourselves with only one other option. See, we've already eliminated that option. I can't have this, because if I have it, then I'm going to do something destructive. So then I never train myself to have it. So I'm a wimp when it comes to having this feeling. So I'm only left with this other option, which is keep burying it, keep burying it, keep burying it, keep burying it. And then you have this phenomenon that depression is anger turned inward. You have massive amounts of depression. Because it's just, I'm so bad, I'm so bad, I'm so bad, I'm so bad. I have this terrible feeling, I'm so bad. The middle way is to allow yourself to have feelings. And this is what one of the main lessons I learned in therapy is that your feelings have so much to teach you. Inside that buried anger is a nugget of something worth looking at, examining. Inside the very thing that you and I want to push away is a whole teaching in itself. If we could only make ourselves available to the teaching. Forget the outer teaching, the inner teaching. What does the anger have to tell me? So here's an example. I have the narcissistic parent in my childhood. I have the suppressed feelings. I have the compensatory people-pleasing and making exceptions. And the smiling and just letting it go, okay? Adult now, 37 years old, and I'm working with my yoga teacher, okay? I'm working with my teacher for like a year. Oh, come and meet me here and come and do this with me. Come there and do this with him. He doesn't show up. Fine. Busy guy, right? Next time. Really want you to give this teaching. Would you mind doing this for me? Sure, I will do it. And by the way, we'd love to get together with you and your wife. Do the thing that he wants me to do, and then no get together. And then there's this, email comes through. Whatever it is, send me an email and make sure I'll get back to you. Send the email, no reply. Send another one, no reply. It's like this. First 16 times, I'm making exceptions. What am I saying in my head? well, what am I saying in my head?
Oh, he's a teacher.
He's busy.
He's testing tests.
Yeah. Okay, you want to go there? You make allowances. You elevate somebody. You try to be the bigger person by saying it's okay, everything is okay, no problem here. Around about the 16th time, I started feeling really, really angry. And I found myself then, the anger was like, like a metal detector or like a mine detector. What are these like rods where you like put them out and you're looking for landmines? The anger got turned around that I was starting to look at this phenomenon everywhere in my life. Like, who's disrespecting me here? Who's not getting back to me? Who's not paying me on time? Who's not doing this on time? Who's not doing that on time? Because why? Because it's an example of how everybody's fucking me. No one gives a goddamn about me. No one has any fucking integrity. No one, see, there it is, right there. There's the anger right there. It just becomes another story, a lens through which I'm starting to experience my reality. Like, this thing didn't get resolved, it got buried. And then it came out, and I'm starting to see it everywhere and react to it in a nasty way. Because it didn't get resolved. And so, like, benign little things. Like, maybe my wife was late once, and I'm like, why do you treat me like this? You see, because it's safer with my wife to have the feelings. It's not safe to have them with my teacher, right? And why is it not safe to have it with my teacher? Because it's encoded with so much meaning from my past. You see, that's why getting to know your past and the story of the trauma and respecting your need is so essential to actually working through the feelings of the moment. Everything that we're taught is about like getting over that. But the getting through means taking some healthy inventory about what happened to you, how you load this, what it is that you need. So then I just started looking into what's the anger? What's the anger with my teacher? What is it? It's about not feeling appreciated or understood or seen or met. Right there, all codes for my relationship with my father. Because my father was all about him. So then I had this very, very funny experience, and only my therapist could really help me, is that I started doing this sort of tantric thing with my teacher, like, oh, it's really coming from my side. This is all coming from my side. This is all about my unresolved issues, and this is a projection from my side. And boy, I could have gone for years like that if I didn't have a teacher, like had a therapist that was like, whoa, hold on a second. I actually don't give a fuck about your teachings and your tantra. I just care about your experience. What's in your experience? Is it really all coming from your side? Is there a remote chance that this person is really not just meeting you and not coming through with their word? Is there a chance for that? And God, I had realized how much devotion I had because I was like, no, it's really coming from me. It's really coming from me. It's really my thing. It's really my past. Let me take responsibility for my past. I wouldn't give even an inch that this teacher was really just not showing up when he said he would. That's already saying something about me, right? Like I couldn't even allow the possibility, not even a gram or hair of it. Well, weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks go on about this. And finally I said, well, wait a minute. Maybe there is something to this. Maybe there is something to the fact that people, because the interesting thing is my teacher is also my wife's teacher. She started having the same experience. So what we could do as therapists, we could start analyzing what she didn't get in her past. But we're still only doing like 50% of the work, right? 50% of the work means just taking responsibility from this side. And believe me, this is like taboo. What we're having this discussion is completely taboo, right? It's completely ludicrous. It's really, there's no space to have a conversation like this. Fuck it. That's what I'm here to have a conversation with you about. Let's have a conversation about it. Is it possible, I came to realize, that it may just be possible for me to say something to this teacher? Yes, taking responsibility for my own background and history and build-up, but like, brother, when you say you're going to do something, could you please just do it? Yes or no?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, and then it occurred to me, like, that's not so bad. Like, what's wrong with me? Like, that's not so bad at all. And maybe if you talk to other students, they were having the same experience. Maybe this teacher needs to hear it from someone, because everybody's like, oh. Like, maybe we're doing the guy a favor. Maybe we're actually helping him. It just depends on the motivation. Right? Motivation early on was, no, I'm not going to say a word because it's all my fault. And the motivation there is really this buried conflict avoidance. Like, I was scared to say something. I was scared to break protocol. I was scared to have retaliation. Right? Remember, because it comes from my father. So if I ever spoke up, I'd actually get a nasty whiplash. But the idea is that in my memory and in my nervous system, there's this stored residue that if I say something or talk about my needs, there's going to be some nasty whiplash. What is that when you're dealing with your teacher? What's the nasty whiplash?
Rejection.
Yeah, you're going to get rejected or worse. You're going to lose their favor, or they won't want to be your teacher anymore, or they're going to get upset at you. And like, there you are back in precarious childhood, aren't you? Oh my God, it's so threatening, like, to lose your teacher's love. To lose your teacher's, presence, to lose your teacher is like being back at like year one again. You have to take that seriously. That's how the nervous system is experiencing it. The number one thing that we learned in these studies with lockdown in prisons, I've said this to some of you, right? The solitary confinement in prisons. Those people that are locked up 23 hours a day, the sites on their brain that are registered during their depressed alienation is the same site that's registered during physical torture. So basically, essentially, as human mammal species, the most crude and hurtful and harmful thing that we can do is alienate us from other people. So that's why abandonment and fear is just so sensitive. But even the facsimile of losing somebody is so frightening that you'll hold on for dear life to all your habituated tendencies of keeping people close. So here's the main take-home point. We haven't even gone past the first one, but the take-home point is respect your feelings, because within them there may be something legitimate to learn. Whatever it is. Usually in the anger, there's something that you're not getting. Right? So then we can come in with a high spiritual teaching and start to mess all of that up. Everybody in here probably is already thinking of the teaching, how that contradicts them at some level. This is part of our work, is holding the cognitive dissonance of the high teaching and the embodied teaching. Huh? Make sense?
Yeah.
You're grunting over there.
Yes.
So go ahead. What is it?
I wish I could say it as good as you can say it. I can't put it in words. Sorry. I'm just
Okay.
here to listen.
Anybody else? Yes.
This thing, it's like I find it a bullying tactic and a deflecting tactic with worldview or karma and emptiness. Well, worldview is like the catchphrase my lineage uses for karma and emptiness, that everything's coming from us and not at us. And I've experienced the bullying use of that as a deflecting moral high ground from others who seem to need to be sat down on the side and talked to, And it's like they'll say, "Oh, you see me as angry. You're angry. Why don't you go deal with that?" And it's like, well, if I see a cup in my hand, does that mean I'm a cup? Or does it mean I can recognize a cup? Because there's a fucking difference. I can just the same see anger without being angry. And the whole purpose of my training is to keep a space of perspective inside myself where I can experience something without being attached to it. And that goes for, of course, relationships. It's like, yeah, in checking motivation, you see, am I currently enraged right now as I'm experiencing anger? No. Do I know what this is? Yes. Can I empathize with what it feels like to be angry as actually the person's suffering, because it's very uncomfortable to be angry? Yeah. So I've personally seen this block up all kinds of important conversations that needed to happen because there was this moral high ground and pushback with emptiness. And I'm just sick of it now. It's kind of in the bee of my bonnet.
Yeah, you're sick of it, but have you also seen the emotional fallout it causes? Like maybe you're sick of it intellectually, you can understand, but the emotional fallout of in your own life not being able to really experience what it is that you're experiencing because there's some sort of conceptual thing out there. That's important. Everybody in here needs to do that before they walk out. It's like, where is this in my life? It's so easy to see it in somebody else, right? It's so easy to see how somebody got buried or circumvented, but like really the work is to really find it here, where you do this thing of denying your experience because of some intellectual construct that may be helpful but has become extreme. It has, in its attempt to register itself, it has also disconnected itself from the embodied experience. So we're so worried about attaching to the embodied experience that we will fall prey to the opposite. We're so scared of having our feeling because somebody said, well, you shouldn't be having your feeling, or having your feeling means you're really attached to it. And so we're so frightened of it that we're just like playing out the other extreme. So this is where we're going in a few seconds.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
So in the example you gave, I mean, in one way it sounds like, we're really conditioned by our youth and just a lot of the trauma that happens with whether they're largely parental relationships, and those are often manifesting themselves in adult relationships as well. And so, the example of the teacher where, on the first part, you're sort of like, okay, it's on me, and it's not them, and then you sort of maybe have this opening and you say, okay, I want to talk to this person about this. I want to bring it up because it isn't just me. But if you bring it up, and then all of a sudden, that person also who is affected by their trauma from their youth, their response is sort of the same narcissistic response we were getting as a child.
Yes.
All of a sudden, it's this potential for a new, different reaction to an old feeling becomes sort of almost potentially re-traumatized.
Yes.
And so how do you, as an adult, what you want to be able to sort of do is to say like, okay, I'm choosing I'm making a different choice.
That's right.
Than I've historically made.
Yes.
But I might get the same reaction.
Absolutely right.
And how do I have enough?
Geez, Shankar, are you in therapy? My goodness.
No, but just then how do you deal with this feeling of, okay, wait, all this stuff is, I sort of have my own thoughts on it, but I just want to hear what you sort of.
Yeah, so like I'm not giving you the answer, I'm giving you what I discovered, okay? Like I had to a little bit let go of the secret fantasy of getting a different outcome.
Right. But like in that, I feel like, so intellectually that makes a lot of sense to me, right?
You're right, so there's something more, okay? There is something more. This is the hallmark of therapy, which is really, really hard to find in Buddhism and yoga, okay? So let me set it up. Let me first describe what I gave up on the fantasy of if I finally got enough courage to say to this teacher, you know what, I really would appreciate if you follow through on what you said. And that's a moment of what I would call satya, one of the yamas. Or is it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Second one, right? Yeah. My truth is that this doesn't feel good. Something's a little off here. Instead of bearing the rage, I allow myself to have that and I explore that, right? The Buddha's first noble truth is actually explore.
Yeah.
It is to understand. It means in order to understand, you have to go encounter. So I gave myself space over weeks and weeks and weeks of excavating into this feeling. And then discovered, you know what, I am a little bit entitled to a reciprocal relationship with this person. If they say they're going to do something, they should do it. And I've given once, twice, 16 times I've given them allowance. I think I can say something. So finally I get there, and guess what? Nothing changes, right? So I have to prepare myself to realize that the real work isn't to get a different outcome necessarily with this person. It is for me to express my truth, which is I have a need here for you to be honest with me. If you're really going to get back, please do get back. So that's the teaching. But something else amazing has to be said, which is it would be really, really nice to find a reciprocal relationship. That's called the corrective emotional experience. The corrective emotional experience is the hallmark of psychodynamic psychotherapy. When you're with your therapist, and your therapist really, really understands you, and then really, really meets you, and then models for you the thing that you never got in an authentic way, what that happens to your nervous system is it pings, it registers. That's what it feels like? So this is how it played out with me and with my therapist, if you don't mind. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Please.
It's okay.
Yeah.
It's so tiny, but it's just this is how it goes with a human being. It's just little things on the radar system. So my therapist is likes to talk a lot. If I don't interrupt, which I usually don't, he can really gab. And he's got a lot of really interesting things to say. One time, I noticed like he was going on, and it really wasn't helping me. It really wasn't going in the direction that I wanted, and I felt this like constriction. And then the traumatized narrative comes up, and it says, just let him. This is about him. Just let him do his thing. Don't interrupt. Don't. So there's the good boy, right? The good little Miles is going to just be polite with his therapist at $250 an hour. So then I felt that, and I was like, no, this is exactly what we're talking about. This is exactly what we're talking about on a meta level in conversation, is like me having to speak up with people. And this is what's called transference. I'm having a transference reaction with my therapist where he becomes the authority adult that I have to please in my own session. So I'm like, Jeffrey, I mean, this isn't helpful. And he stopped dead. And he's like, thank you so much for telling me that. I'm so sorry. And it's so good that you were able to say something. We've been talking about this for weeks. And it's like, it's so simple. It's so simple. My fear is so ingrained that I'm going to displease and hurt somebody. It's so ingrained that it's so unconscious. But in that moment, there was enough mindfulness and enough courage, enough satya to actually change the trajectory. But this is the corrective emotional experience, is that finally somebody was like, oh, yeah, I'm so sorry. I missed you. I'm so sorry. See, that's so important, to have at least one other person in your life that actually does meet you. You see, we can do this thing of like giving up hope on a lot of people and just be like, oh, this is what I need to do. I'm building my muscle of satya. I have to speak up. I have to keep people honest, and I have to like share. I have to keep, the relationship, the integrity of the relationship. I have to, wherever it's challenging and I'm afraid, I have to do my emotional yoga, which is like, I have to stretch emotionally. I'm so bound and afraid that I have to, like, instead of throwing out the mat and do the asana where the physical posture becomes stretched, emotionally I have to stretch my trauma anticipation. And then I finally do And what happens is there's a neural circuitry when someone actually feedbacks a different experience to you. And then think about it. If that's one little ping, may not be so consequential. But week after week after week. And as it's registering here, you start actually, maybe your partner, maybe your wife, maybe your colleague, you start having a different experience. See, that's when the personality begins to get ironed out. It has to get worked out. See, that's how it gets worked out. See, it got formed in interaction. All your residual self-image and hang-ups and trauma got formed in an interpersonal circuitry with caregivers that were not here to blame because they themselves were traumatized and are a part of a trajectory of transgenerational traumas. We're not blaming anybody here. All we're saying is, where does it get worked out? In the same way that it got registered, it gets worked out. In the same way, like you and me, we have a conversation, we register each other's facial expressions. I feel you with my mirror neurons. I feel your I empathize with your inner experience. You experience me enter into your mind and it registers on your nervous system. This person is with me. And then you can do the same. You're free to do the same with me. And that's how we form a loving bond. That's how we develop trust. Everything else is a reason not to trust. Everything else is a reason to feel alienated and alone, isn't it? Because there was no openness and receptivity. There was just, me. So that's, I think, it's a fantasy to presume that you just have to do your yoga from your side. You have to work it out with another human being who has enough resources to be available to you, has enough presence, have enough compassion. So then if you feel that come back to you, then you become the next person for somebody else. See, everything that you're starved from in your life, if you get a little bit, then you pay it forward. Don't we have that expression, pay it forward? See, that moment with Jeffrey is an inspiration for me to redouble my efforts to really get out of my own head with my own folks that I work with. Right? Really, really be there for them. And trust that that's how it's going to go. You don't have to have a theoretical construct. You just, week after week, really register, really be there, emotionally flexible, emotionally free. With all the negative bits, too. If they're angry, well, what are you angry about? Let's talk about it. Instead of like shutting down, getting defensive, then you block the energy. It's like a circuit breaker. Everything is a circuit breaker or an opportunity for circuitry. That's empathy. We're built and hardwired for it. That's where the magic is. That's where the magic is with therapy. Now, the question is, in our spiritual communities, when our teachers have 500 students and are bouncing around the goddamn globe, where do you get this? So I think, actually, Michael, is it in Geshe Michael's letter, did he talk about...
Definitely Neale once.
And what is it called?
Well, the nurse one. It's like, let's say you go to the doctor, and you only see a doctor for, 2 minutes? It's mostly the nurse you're with. So the doctor tells the nurse, okay, give the patient this drug, which is like the Dharma, the information. And then you go home. But then who checks up on you, see if that medicine's working or not, if you're having any adverse effects? It's the Neale, who's like the nurse you call, or they call you and say, hey, a day later, did you sleep last night? How's your appetite? Any nausea? Any hallucinations? Let's stay in touch because this information of these ideas is a drug and a powerful one. And so we need to make sure, and I love the fact that he reiterated the importance of the we space and the group and the kula, that we're all able to look at each other in the eyes and check in and have a person who's safe, who understands what we're putting our fingers into in terms of the terms and the practices, and say, how are you? They've been down the path longer, and so they're a good guide to help us avoid getting waste time with wrong paths or wrong commentaries on what to do. that was my whole trauma about having 2 senior practitioners run off in the 3-year retreat, and as adults not reach out to their group anymore. It's like, that was really hard. It's like, yeah, adults have the right to go off and be out of touch. However, it still pulls on all of the rest of us because we worry. And then if and when something bad happens, then everyone goes into a blame frenzy. You know, so it was like a breakdown of the accountability of the group to check in for, is it healthy or not?
Yeah. So without going into that specific situation, I think the idea, I know in my own lineage there is always a mentor. There's your guru, and then there's a mentor, somebody who's close. Somebody, I mean, you have to, like, the regular, consistent, and reliable person is important. Now, there's a person that gives you the teaching, and then there's who's on the ground, and who are you checking in with, and how, is there a place to really talk about weird, uncomfortable, difficult reactions? That's the real question. And maybe there is somebody there, but then if you feel like you can't really have an adverse reaction, then what purpose is that person there? You see, like, there has to be a culture of accept everything, even your dissent, or even your rage, or even your curiosity or concern. There has to be a culture of that. Otherwise, that person that serves that function is no good. Codependency in the guise of compassion. Codependency in the guise of compassion. Codependency means taking care of someone to your own detriment. So by definition, it doesn't even mean compassion. I mean, by definition, maybe most of what we're practicing is compassion because we have some buried need, or compassion because we're afraid, or compassion because we feel ashamed, or compassion for whatever other reason isn't compassion. If we're doing nice things and taking care of other people and focusing on other people's needs because of an old habit of taking care of someone, out of an old habit of being afraid, if we don't, out of an old habit of fearing retaliation or whatever it is, that's not compassion. You know, Shanti Deva was very clear when he said, equalize. The equalize self and other means take realistically your own needs too, I think. Now, this is just my interpretation, but if you don't do that, what ends up happening is you spend years doing the compassion thing, but then you're starved, emotional anorexic. That you get starved. Now, technically, if we start looking at the teachings on karma is if you give, you get back, right? Mm-hmm. But remember, karma there are 4 parts to karma, including the motivation. So that's this point right here. If the motivation is an unconscious motivation of giving out of some self-centered need, then you're definitely going to get what you need back, right? Does it make sense? Yeah, so it's better to be just honest and out and open that I actually have needs. I'm a human being here and I have needs. No problem, actually. Right? It's kind of like, who the fuck do we think we are? With spiritual community, suddenly we don't have needs. Like, I need food and water and sex and whatever else. I need you to pay attention to me once in a while. No big deal if you could just get honest about it, but suddenly that's like egoic and narcissistic and self-absorbed. But like, so it gets totally warped and then it gets buried. That's like the phenomenon. It gets warped and buried. And then it comes out in some weird way. Whereas if we could just make room to have an equal exchange, respect our need, respect our feelings, maybe some of these teachings would make much more sense and actually give us what they say they're going to get, what we're going to get out of it. But it's like that, it's that secret little motivation in there. Think about in your own life. You know, the donation bowl is a good place, you know, when it's a secret donation, that's always interesting. You know, how much you give when no one's looking versus how much you give when someone's looking and all this kind of thing. You know, very interesting. I call these 80-20 relationships. Okay, from a karma and emptiness perspective, they want us to have some sort of 100-0 relationship where we're selflessly giving constantly, right? So there is the ideal measuring board, right? Remember, most of these things come from some ideal fantasy of what we are aspiring to, and in so chasing that, we totally neglect where we really are at. So an 80-20 relationship is when you're giving 80 and you're expecting 20 back, but then your needs are getting starved. But better to just respect that a little bit more, I think. Why not it be a 50-50 relationship, because that's reciprocal and even and fair, and the more you have, the more you're able to give, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But that gets back to my first question about separating the teacher from the teachings, and is it possible? Because in my understanding, it is meant to be this 100-0. And I know, well, I don't know, am I making sense? This idea of giving without that. I mean, look, the Bhagavad Gita, you do your action without attachment to the fruits of your action. I mean, we see it all over the scriptures.
But that's the ideal, right? So this is what I'm saying, is where are you at in reality? You see, this is the problem.
Struggling.
Yes, so can you just make space for that place? When you're struggling and you don't feel like giving, you can do a little yoga on it. But you're a yoga teacher. If you get me into halasana or whatever, if I overstretch, what's going to happen to me?
You're going to pull your hamstring.
Yeah, but so the mind is a little bit different. There's not a hamstring tear there.
Right.
But we have these high ideals, which is the same or the equivalent of like seeing Iyengar in a pose or whatever. I'm not jumping into that. You as a skilled yoga teacher are going to work with where I'm at.
Right.
Why don't we do that with some of these ideals?
I don't know.
Well, no,
I wish I
don't
knew.
think there's the terms. I don't think there's the terms. Part of working with a fourth way practitioner is they have some terms that us yogis don't seem to have, like voluntary suffering. When I first heard about what voluntary suffering was, I was like, oh, it's a scenario where you know, you feel it in your gut that I must do something that's uncomfortable out of compassion and honoring my own gut, and also what I see that it's not okay to just continue to give because it's not helping this person. And it's uncomfortable to go and make this course correction, but if I don't, I'm going to resent the giving. It's going to be bad karmic seeds for me, and it's not going to help them at all. So you say, this is not going to be not going to be comfortable, and I know that, but I'm going to do it because it's the healthy thing to do. It's where the need is going to be met.
Yeah.
And that's actually like blazing new neural pathways for fidelity and the 4 modes of Alama and whatever else you want to say about it. But there's I found no terms for these things in yogic texts. It's very hard to find them. It's just this altruistic thing for someone who's been in a very high evolutionary state, but then there's all of us trying to pretend that we're there.
Yeah, we're pretending, and then we don't match up, and then what's the phenomenon about not matching up? So if it'd be okay if we just realized we were pretending, but that's not the case. We don't match up, and then what do we feel?
Feel worse about yourself.
Yeah, we feel worse about ourselves. Yeah, so I think the idea, I mean, when you say the voluntary, what is it?
Suffering.
Voluntary suffering, you're taking on the voluntary suffering, right? As a stretch?
Yeah, it's like I need to cut somebody off, let's say. I need to make a boundary in the way I serve them because I'm exhausted and they're not doing any work.
Yeah.
So I need to confront that.
Yeah.
And that's not comfortable, but it is the work that needs to be done for the evolution of the relationship.
Yeah.
Or that it's time to let it go.
Yeah. So that's the same thing as holding, even though I'm the student, I can hold the teacher accountable to their word too.
Yeah.
Right? Sometimes if a rough sketch is, again, this is not, I don't know, this is just how I'm working sometimes. I do this thing called give one, get one. Give one, get one means like I will do I will do the stretch of suppressing something that I need in the relationship and give one so that someone else gets something. But for every time I do that, I also will take one, which is like, I won't let myself overgive, I'll actually ask. And that one's always more, it's harder, because it signals the little alarm bell of the selfishness bell. Oh, I'm being selfishness here? Anybody have that one? Yeah. So the giving and taking is like, okay, you look like you need it more right now, I'm going to give it to you. But then my habit is, I'm going to do that with everybody. And then I go home and I'm like, not literally, but I'm not present for my wife or whatever, kick my dog or whatever it is. I don't do that. But the give one, get one is like, for every time that I'm willing to stretch myself to give, then I also have to be willing to take. And that's harder for compassionate, more friendly people that are grafted to the selflessness teachings and the compassionate teachings. Like, realistically means like, feed. It's time to feed. You have to feed. It means you count too. You count equally with somebody else. This is like, we're dealing with the conventional level. You count equally as somebody else. And if you have more than you can give, and if you don't have enough, be okay with taking.
Would you say you count equally with your guru, with your teacher, with your lama?
Yeah, see, okay. In the situation that I gave, it was essential that I did. It was essential that I saw myself equally, that I counted equally, that I deserved a female equally as my piety and my respect of giving. Right? But all I'm saying is, if you're practicing higher teaching, and you just have to be realistic. You can aspire on the yoga mat. You can see the model, and you can aspire for it. But if your aspiration supersedes or transcends or bypasses where you really are, you're going to get hurt. Mm-hmm. So then the messages keep coming back to where you are. The aspiration is fine. Don't dump it. Just remember, you're not like, 10th level bodhisattva. You're just ordinary. But then you start worrying about the tantric teachings in which you're not supposed to see yourself that way. But I think when we get to the tantric teachings, we're going to need another weekend course for this. Because it probably requires a whole rehabilitation. Like, we all need to go to rehab for a little while and get realistic with ourselves. But for ordinary teachings, like, everybody in here understands, like, because of our traumas in our past and because of our own good nature and because we've had good experiences giving, we will graft to teachings on selflessness and compassion and kindness for the other person. All this is just be mindful of where that might be hurting. And pay attention to it and look into it. And don't be afraid to feed, to nurse. Here again, okay, detachment as a suppression of one's needs for love and connection. The teachings on renunciation and detachment. We the things that we should give up. When you hear a word like renunciation, when you hear a word like detachment, it is loaded. It's completely loaded. And then you can think of what the ideal is, and then what it is that you're trying to give up on the ground level. It's really important to consider as you aspire for a teaching on renunciating or giving up. What is it that we think renunciation actually means? Does that mean like we become completely needless? Emotionless? I mean, this is like very common. I'm sure there are many teachers in here that see that in their students, and maybe there are teachers here and students here that actually experience that conflict inside themselves. What is the thing that you're working on, like trying to give up? What is the motivation? What is it that you think that you need to give up? That you can't have anymore? That you should push away? But just take a moment, think about it in your own life, wherever you are in your own practice. These things, whatever X, Y, and Z, 1, 2, 3, have been deemed not good for you, for example. Here's a quote from Wellwood. Western Buddhists are practicing in the relational area. Western Buddhists are practicing in the relational area as not non-attachment, but avoidance of attachment. Avoidance of attachment, however, is not freedom from attachment. It is still a form of clinging. Clinging to the denial of your human attachment needs out of a distrust that love can be reliable. Let me read it slowly because it's fantastic. Again?
Yeah.
Yes.
Western Buddhists are practicing in the relational area is a not non-attachment, but avoidance of attachment. So what we're practicing is not non-attachment. What we're practicing is avoidance of attachment. Avoidance of attachment, however, is not freedom from attachment. It is still a form of clinging. Clinging to the denial of your human attachment needs out of a distrust that love can be reliable. Maybe some of the confusion here is the word attachment in the psychotherapy literature is not a dirty word. Attachment in the psychotherapy literature is about how you get your needs met and how bonding feels good and how we need secure, reliable people in our life. So clinging to the denial of your human attachment needs, the fact that you're a human being and you need love and you need to have feelings, you need to have these things, you have a relationship. Don't be a bozo. You have needs. Let's get over ourselves. Okay, the spiritual superego. The spiritual superego is when you have to do 50 push-ups when you can only really do 10. Whatever the 50 push-ups are in your life, think about it. You've got to for me, my wife practices Ashtanga, okay? So then she got me on the Ashtanga wagon. That means getting up at 6:30 every single day, 6 days a week, right? Well, what's my lifestyle? My lifestyle is I see patients and I teach at night and I get home and have dinner at 10 o'clock and I got to wind down and suddenly this is a little out of reach. But I'm a little type A. And suddenly I have a mental image of what I should be doing. And then this is the key, is when I can't fulfill it, how do I feel? I feel completely inadequate. I feel oh my God, I'm such a loser. I'm such a fraud. But it's just a poor setup. It's not, again, it's this, hopefully by now you're getting the recipe. It's not really being present with what is. What is my capacity? What is my growing edge? The growing edge is good. Physical asanas are a wonderful metaphor for how we can translate this teaching emotionally. Find your edge, breathe, move a little bit into it. Don't always back off, but don't go too far in. Have these wonderful qualities, aspirations, motivations, and goals. But recognize where you are and just work where you are. It's just that. That's the twist right there. Anybody have an example of the superego? Spiritual superego. Was there anybody?
Telling yourself you have to meditate a certain amount of times a day.
That's good. Yeah. I have to do, right? I should do. So this is what Karen Horney called the tyranny of the shoulds. So we start to use yamas and niyamas or other kind of value systems or training methodologies, and then we add that should. I should. And the should is a kind of bypass for what is good for you right now. So the thing is the yoga is to get to know your body, for example. Now, if I'm tired at 6:30 and the little should comes up, you fat bastard, you get to that yoga thing. You get there. So what is that? That's a complete denial of what my body needs. Where's the yoga in that? What if my body needed rest? What if taking care of myself is more important than the sort of spiritual values I place on my evolution? It's tricky, isn't it? Yeah. You can see that it's very tricky.
The Dalai Lama travels and probably only gets a few hours of sleep, and your teachers and all of the archetypes on the walls didn't need sleep, and so I really shouldn't have to get sleep if I'm gonna, maybe I'm being too selfish, and I should just not, be angry in my practice when I know that I need a few extra hours and not practice at 6:30 and practice at 8:30.
Yeah.
Or 9.
Yeah. It's tricky, isn't it? It's really tricky. You think like Olympic athletes, right? What they have to sacrifice in order to produce. So then you start thinking, well, I can be Michael Jordan. I can be, what's the famous swimmer? 7 gold medals. What's his name?
Phelps. Oh, Phelps.
Phelps, yeah. So Phelps, what is 7 gold medals like?
I just gave my age. Sorry.
The Spitz first Phelps.
70s.
What the sacrifices are for one human being to excel. Okay? So it's useful to have people like that to remind us of the heights that human beings can get to remind us of what discipline can get to remind us of anything, the message that anything is possible, right? But then so that's the ultimate, right? That's the template, that's the value system, that's the goal, that's the, you use the word model, right? But then we all can't be Michael Jordan. Realistically, can anyone in here feel like they could be Michael Jordan? When I was a kid, my room was plastered with Michael Jordan posters, okay? And I practiced sincere guru devotion. Whatever I saw was but I'm not going to be a Michael Jordan in this life, So it just is like these teachings are incredibly powerful for directing the mind and our time in this life, but not to the detriment of what's actually possible on the ground. Like, I don't know how many of us in here could actually sustain a training regimen like Phelps. And who would even want to? Who really wants to? That's the thing. If you want to, then you try. You try as best as you can. And what happens is maybe you fall short. And then what happens is then we throw the whole thing out. Instead of just keep going, reminding ourselves at the same time of what where we're heading, what's realistic. It's a cognitive dissonance on every level. It's trying to hold both form and emptiness at the same time, both the ideal and the practical at the same time. Not rejecting one for the other. Because the rejecting the ideal and just going for the what is has its own consequences, right? But I don't think many people in here have to deal with that, right? We're like spiritual practitioners. We have our yamas and niyamas. We have our training regimen. We should be meditating every day. So we're more in the camp of reinvesting our life with some reality. Reinvesting our spiritual purpose or practice with some embodied reality. What's practical and realistic today? This is what I've got today. This tired body or this emotional situation, this is the reality today. I'm running out of time, so I just disclose to the... Somebody wanted spiritual goodies for the narcissism. Doggy biscuits for the narcissism? Nobody? Okay. Doggy biscuits for the narcissism when you actually have a realization and then you think you're superior. And then you start thinking that everybody else is inferior. And that's really sad. It's sad because it cuts you off from actually cuts you off from relationship. And that's the most important. That's the most spiritual thing, is actually having a relationship. Having a real relationship that accepts and acknowledges who you are and who the other person is. That's very profound. Okay, some closing remarks. The cost of not considering how we're hiding out in our spiritual practices can be great in terms of the years wasted and in terms of unknowingly hurting others. That's not having this kind of conversation, there's many different levels here, wherever you are. You're just a beginner or you're really advanced. The fact that we haven't had a conversation like this is detrimental. We have to really consider that. I don't know where it is. It wasn't in my training. It was in my psychotherapy training. Okay, this is when they encourage therapists in training to be in therapy and have lots of supervision. Because you have so much inadequacy complex. Right? 3 years of reading and 5 years of this, and then suddenly they cast you in front of a live human being and you have to fix them. It's terrifying. So then you have lots of these process groups and supervision and peer counseling, and it's all built in because they realize, oh my God, you're going to freak out. No one's expecting you to do anything significant here. Just see if you can survive one session without throwing up. But I think in the spiritual communities we don't have this teaching that often. Okay, remember that the First Noble Truth encourages us to get closer to our suffering and in order to understand it. And in that way, identify and get close and learn from our trauma. Don't avoid your trauma. My hypothesis here, or Wellwood's hypothesis, is that you will evolve more beautifully, more sustainably if you take precious time to acknowledge your trauma. There is no transcendence without transformation. The only way through is through. Isn't it? There's no getting over. You have to go through. You have to work it out. It's ingrained in your memory, in your file bank. It's in your body. It's in your nervous system. The spiritual practices are to help you work through it, not to get over it into some fantasy la-la land. Here I thought maybe we could flip it, because most of us think that mindfulness and meditation are for spiritual practice and psychotherapy is for psychological issues, and there's a big, if you go to therapy, you're something's wrong with you, and if I do yoga and meditation, it's how many people are in therapy and no one wants to raise their hand? How many people do yoga and everybody's yeah, flip it. Mindfulness practice can really help you with your psychological wounding. And psychotherapy can be the most spiritual experience you'll ever have. Because you have to get honest. You're finally going to get honest with another human being. You're going to be naked. It may take 6 months or a year. Finally, you're naked. Actually, spiritual and psychological work go hand in hand. They are interdependent. We can aspire for great heights while accepting our limits. Form is emptiness and emptiness is form. Here are the last 2 points. This goes to the nurse model that Michael was talking about. An encouragement to find healthy relationships in which we can be honest. Working closely and honestly with somebody else provides a checks and balance, covers our blind spots, and offers additional support. And most of us think that we're kind of like lone rangers in our spiritual practice. You do your practice on your mat, do your practice on your cushion, then you go into the hills and you do it all alone. Somehow, I don't know why, that's the template or the model or the idea. But the trench work is relational. We have all decided to be urban yogis.
It's 6 o'clock.
It's not.
It's not even 6.
I know.
We are not monastics. We chose to have families. We chose to have lovers. We chose to have kids. We chose to go to work and have colleagues. How is that built into our ideals?
It's not.
Where is that built into our ideals? And if it's not, then why not? And how are we going to adjust for that? Because we're in a different situation and a different context. Huh?
Yeah.
That's where I think a lot of the spiritual bypassing is for most Westerners, is that it's not taken into consideration. Householders, women, 2012.
Yeah. Children.
Jobs, mortgages,
Yeah.
children,
Yeah.
war. That's a huge bypass.
Huge.
This is the fourth way. This is why the fourth way is called the fourth way. And the first way is the beings who are working towards evolution just through the body. Second way, the devotionals, the bhaktis, who are working through the heart, but are so open that they need to be in a cloistered environment with others doing that similar work. Third way is like the analytical buddhi yogis, the raja yogis. Again, needing to be cloistered to be in a quiet place. But they say the fourth way is the combination of those three in life. And the more I've learned about this, coming from Mr. Gurdjieff's work, the more it sounds like Vajrayana, for the householder, who seems to be doing things that are ordinary, but internally, with their view and their training in Sutrayana, is transforming everything. And it's a hell of a lot harder because we're doing it, paying the bills, in a relationship, after a couple of pints at 10 p.m., and all the rest. And that's where I've really enjoyed having the synthesis, which is for me is coming back full circle to how I was raised, is what is practice in life, and how do we keep it healthy?
How do we keep it real, yo? Keep it real.
I feel like a counterpoint though that I would offer is two things. One is actually Krishnamacharya talks a lot about being a householder yogi, sort of living in the world, not going into the caves, but also, yes, I think it is about adapting a lot of maybe historical spiritual practices to modern society, but oftentimes I feel like that becomes a rationalization as well, where it's, I think things, in our modern society also need to change drastically. And if you sort of say, okay, I can accept these things, I feel like another form of spiritual bypassing, which is maybe the opposite, which is, oh, I can do all these things and have a spiritual practice. And it's, well, can you? Obviously every person is going to make their own choice, but I think oftentimes it requires sacrifice. It requires choices, really difficult choices that, when culture and society is moving in one direction, and for you, your spiritual practice is actually saying, you can't have that and maybe, this other sort of less anxiety, sort of clearer existence. So I think that's just, I feel like a counterpoint to it.
Yeah, I think that's where the renunciation is like, I should renounce, but the key is like, can you experiment with your own life? Are you going to just adopt what people are saying? Either I have to give this up or I have to do this, and these things are important to me. How am I going to make it work? Is more of an open question, and then you use. I think Gandhi's biography is called "Experiments with Truth." Mm-hmm. That's an open invitation rather than a dogma. Like, these things are important to us. We're in this context. I want to have a family, and I think these things are important. How am I going to make that work? May mean that you have to do some experimentation. Do you have the flexibility to let go of the ideals or what's been told to you as far as how one does this, and really give it a go? Like, that's courageous, I think. But it can be perceived as like, after the tradition and I'm going this way. So, we don't want to talk about that. We don't want to. By the way, Krishnamacharya, I heard this while I was doing this research. I don't know. Is there a biography of Krishnamacharya written by Mohan?
AG, yeah. I think it recently came out. Fairly recently.
It is said that Krishnamacharya, upon his deathbed, was buried. He put some money for his burial under his pillow. Now, my analyst said that was actually an indication of his inability to let go and just surrender to the process of being taken care of, that he was in his last moments trying to control things. But there's a bypass. That's a bypass interpretation. Like, I can't just let my family take care of my dead body. I even have to prepare for this. Yeah, here's the 5,000 rupees and slip it under my pillow. I don't know if that's true. We have to figure that one out.
Well, he was 108.
Point is this. All these great teachers, okay? It's just dangerous sometimes to over-idealize. That's all the point is. I'm not saying don't hold pure view. In fact, I don't know what I'm saying. I'm saying that I'm confused. How about that? Is that acceptable?
Yes.
I don't have an answer for this one, okay? Especially when you get into those kind of teachings. But all I'm willing to say is acknowledge that I'm confused about some of this stuff. And that if I don't acknowledge that I'm confused, that's more dangerous. Okay? And like, just having a pat answer is sometimes dangerous. Because what it does is it puts us on a trajectory where we should be following, yet we're leaving behind all our concerns. So that's all I'm saying. I think that was the point of this whole thing, is just to open a space for your consideration, to think, to feel acknowledged, to have weird and difficult feelings and questions. So that you're not just following a trajectory that can get you into trouble either now or down the road. I know that's very basic. You could have probably just like read that on a postcard and not come.
We're spiritual beings having a human experience.
Ah.
That's noble. Yeah.
Mm. Okay, let's do a little ending meditation.